The Matrix has its roots in primitive arcade games, in early graphics programs, holograms, and military experimentation with cranial jacks. On the Sony, a two-dimensional space war faded behind a forest of mathematically generated ferns, demonstrating the spatial possibilities of logarithmic spirals. Cold blue military footage burned through, lab animals wired into test systems, helmets feeding into fire-controlled circuits of tanks and warplanes. Cyberspace, a consensual hallucination experienced daily by billions of legitimate operators in every nation, by children being taught mathematical concepts, a graphic representation of data abstracted from the banks of every computer in the human system, unthinkable complexity, lines of light ranged in the non-space of the mind, clusters and constellations of data, like city lights receding.
An unheard of amount of market power by these players who can now kind of dictate the terms of the internet based on the way they divide up the markets, the monopolies a majority of Americans face in terms of high-speed internet, and absent law, we're completely at their mercy as gatekeepers of the future. And so we're in the fight, and we'll be into the fight, for the years to come. And right now we're in a tough spot. And so.
Good. So front and center, you guys, is this vote that the FCC is scheduled to have on December 14th. There's some hissing in the audience that will roll back the current protections around having an open internet, not having blocking, not having throttling, not having paid prioritization schemes. Those are the rules right now. Can you guys talk about what the world will look like when that, or if that rollback happens on the 14th? From your perspective, I mean, how will it change? I get that question all the time. Is it going to be immediate? What will it look like for you? Anybody?
Yeah, it's hard to say immediately what will happen. I think there's been a lot of public pressure on ISPs to let people know we're watching what they're doing. But to know what they want to do, just listen to the 2014 oral argument in the case that threw out the 2010 rules. In response to a question from one of the judges on the panel, Verizon's attorney said, do you think you guys should be allowed to block access to particular websites? And she said, yeah, of course. If you don't pay us, we should be able to block you. It's just monetizing a transaction that is already being paid for by the end user. So I think there's a real interest in doing this in what will be ostensibly a very concealed and sort of subversive way. It'll be through trying to create congestion at interconnection points. It'll be trying to entice users with what appear to be very pro-consumer offerings that are really just anti-competitive, like the zero rating programs that I think that have popped up in the time since the 2015 rules have been offered. So I think it's going to be important to be really vigilant about these types of nefarious attacks on the open internet that are going to be designed to be concealed, because they know we're all watching the obvious stuff. But ultimately, there will be a strong push, I think, from major players to sort of capitalize on their gatekeeper power and favor their own content, favor the content of those that can pay the most.
I think looking at what they say in court when they challenge the Federal Communications Commission in the past on net neutrality is super informative about what they envision the world should be, right? So we'll take Comcast, for example. So Comcast explicitly says the network should not be non-discriminatory. What does that mean? That means that they want to have some sort of control over what happens over the internet. And why do they want it? Because there's an enormous amount of money they can make from it in terms of extracting rents and ensuring friction in areas that right now are seamless. I think our panelists talked about how there's so much opportunity for people to make something of the open internet right now, and that opportunity has a value. And the ISPs, the major ISPs, let me take a quick pause. There's a lot of small internet service providers in this country that support net neutrality, that support your rights to privacy, who have opposed this FCC. It's the giant national vertically integrated companies who want to change the system. And it's because they're in the position to extract that value and extract those opportunities, and for what, right? For at the end of the day, they make an enormous amount of money, but absent the law, they can extract even further from there.
Right. It's throughout history, every time we've been introduced introduced to a new piece of media that has brought an opportunity to sort of democratize information and access to information. There's been a way in which that's been clamped down on, and special interests have come in. And so whether it's been newspapers, radio, television, and now the internet, we see this space in which corporate gatekeepers are once again coming in to make money. I think there's there's also other concerns when I look to other countries like Russia around like what would happen around sort of our digital borders and the way that information is blocked and throttled that would be in the public interest. And I think another piece to this that's also worth noting is that as we look at, we already know that there's been so many different comments around this, that overwhelmingly bipartisan support for net neutrality. And so now what we've heard is these corporate entities or governments saying, well, you know, we do actually support net neutrality. Like Comcast has a splash page up where they talk about how they actually do want net neutrality. They just want like a more gentle type of net neutrality without Title II, without it being sort of regulated as a utility. And my boss often says that if you say you like Title II, that you say you like net neutrality, but you don't like Title II, that's like saying, I like the beach, but I don't like sand or water. Sun's a little problematic too. I'm not a big fan of fish. Like you can't have net neutrality and preserve the integrity of the internet without Title II.
Well, actually, so that brings up a good point. You know, it's a legal argument that, you know, is going around policy circles, not just a demand for an open internet, but how do you ensure that we have an open internet? And Ernesto, I wanted to ask you, we often hear folks say, well, the only way you can have it is through the Title II rules that we have right now. You also hear people who don't like those rules saying that the only way to do it is to have legislation to get us there. I mean, how should folks interpret when they hear those arguments, specifically this call for legislation? Is there one only way to do it, and how should they interpret this call for legislation?
So I'd be extraordinarily skeptical of the idea that there needs to be Congress involved to pass a new law. The reason I say that is because we have net neutrality today. It's supported by the law. It's been validated by the courts. What needs to be fixed from that point forward? Nothing, right? I worry about the industry is trying to co-opt net neutrality as a philosophy and our advocacy as a means to pretend they're in favor and then to go to senators and members of the House and get them to pass a bill and they will pretend that's network neutrality. We've seen this script before back in 2010 when at&t essentially endorsed what the FCC did under what was called a Title I net neutrality order. Died in the courts when Verizon challenged it, but they claimed that was net neutrality just to try and steal that PR. But any member of, when I visit DC, I come out there every few months. When a staffer asks me, well, shouldn't Congress legislate? I ask them, well, what's the problem? What are you trying to fix? Because right now I have a law that requires a non-discriminatory network. I have an agency that can enforce that. If an ISP decides to disobey the law, what am I upset about at that point? And so I think so be very cautious about who's pushing for legislation, because I think it's a shell game at the end of the day.
Yeah, I mean, I think ultimately the one pushback there, and I agree that it's really unlikely that we're ever going to get quality net neutrality legislation from Congress as currently constituted. We saw this in the last round of net neutrality debate when Senator Thune put out a bill that used all the buzzwords from net neutrality. It said, hey, we're going to not allow these ISPs to block or throttle or engage in certain types of paid prioritization, but they defined it in a really, really narrow way. And what we've seen time and time again, as Brandi pointed out, is folks on the ISP side co-opting the language of net neutrality for things that aren't net neutrality. That being said, the fact that we're having this debate right now is in some ways an argument for legislation if they get it right. It's a lot harder to change a law than it is to have an agency do what they're doing, sort of a sham of a public process, and just reverse an order that came out a couple of years ago. It probably can't keep happening. I think there's some reasonable debate to be had that this is sort of a non-ductile process. You do it too many times, and you just can't keep doing it over and over and over again. But ultimately, the important thing here are the rules, right? That's what we need. We need the rules. This debate about Title I versus Title II, when Chairman Pai tells you, well, we had strong rules under Title I, well, that's nonsense because you can't have them under Title I anymore. The way to think about it for sort of non-lawyers out there is Title I and Title II are just sort of they're like tasting menus almost, right? They have a set of set rules you can apply to different types of networks. But the FCC can pick and choose from those and decide what you want to apply. But if the rule you want to apply isn't on that tasting menu, you can't get it, right? So Title I rules, you can't anymore enforce bright line net neutrality rules. It's not on the menu. The only menu that has that is Title II. So if you want those rules, you have to do it under the Title II regulatory authority. But the law is there. It exists. We can do it. We have it currently in place. The only reason you would want to do legislation is to either fix something that's wrong. There really isn't, except for maybe like zero rating stuff, which is a more complicated debate, or to ensure that this doesn't keep just flipping back and forth.
So I encourage you guys again, if you have questions, especially about net neutrality, please fill it out on the cards and pass them forward to the folks who are collecting them. But before we get to questions, I wanted to turn to a few other parts of policy and competition policy that is also bubbling up. Net neutrality, I think, sucks up a lot of the oxygen. Right now, it certainly is. But there are a lot of other concerns about maintaining the freedom of the internet, maintaining the openness of the internet, and ensuring that gatekeepers online do not keep us from having freedom of expression online, that we are looking at beyond the pure net neutrality rules. And I wanted to give folks a chance to talk about a few of them, and maybe folks will have questions about those as well. First, we're hearing a lot, actually Ernesto mentioned this, we're seeing over the last few years a lot of vertical mergers, companies buying up companies, cable companies merging together, companies that are broadband providers buying content, and there's a lot of concerns that there's a severe amount of consolidation in the marketplace. And DC has been talking about this, but I'm curious about how folks on our panel view these issues and how you guys think it impacts your sector or the work that you do. So there's any kinds of competition policy out there that you could talk about, but I'm curious which ones you guys are following, which ones are most important to you. Otessa, maybe we haven't heard from you in a while. Maybe you can talk about your perspective as a producer and a content creator.
Sure, so mine will be probably way more out of left field than everyone else. But when you said the democratization of media, that really struck with me. That was, again, why I came into the space. And now that is under fire. But the interesting thing is, the reason why we found so much success online, whether it was through small businesses or content creation or movements, what have you, is that there was a major supply and demand failure. And as a content creator, forgive me for coming at this from the more creative and artistic element. If you are never seeing yourself up on the screen, if you are never being given the opportunity to create the story, you're going to want to go out and do it yourself. And this was the means to do so. So without representation and with suppression, I'm going to nerd out and I'm going to quote Jurassic Park. I'm going to say that life finds a way. Okay. We don't know what that way is going to be, and I don't necessarily think that it's going to come through Congress. I don't think it's going to come through laws being passed or anything like that. I think that, and actually one of the things that I'm interested in, but also sort of concerned about, is that the U.S. will no longer be the place for this. And I think, and when we were talking on the phone earlier, I mentioned Finland, where in Finland, internet access is a human right. And it is a legal right. Right? Yeah. And I've been hashtagging, like, please make me an honorary Finn. I'm waiting for the embassy to acknowledge me, so please, if anyone's watching, make me an honorary Finn. But I think something that we might see is that we're going to start losing a lot of our business, right? Because the demand is still there. People still want those stories. We're not going to get them if we, when Netflix teams up with T-Mobile, the truly independent content creators aren't going to be there. And yes, it's great that The Handmaid's Tale exists and that there are so many female directors, but that is one show, and 60 shows were greenlit in just one season? So I'm like, okay, you can hold up one show, but when I look at the people who submit to my festival, it is truly diverse, right? So we're going to have the same supply and demand failure, and people are going to go elsewhere, and they're probably not going to go to the US. We're going to lose them. We're going to lose this market. And so it's not just the right thing to do, it's going to be money just flying out the window.
This is the internet. It's big and beautiful, full of information and memes and communities, even those shady bits over there.
We turn now to look at the fight for the future of the internet, to save net neutrality, to save the internet as we know it. Supporters of net neutrality say the rules are needed to keep the internet open and prevent corporate service providers from blocking access to websites, slowing down content, or providing paid fast lanes for internet service.
But net neutrality has come under attack by the Trump administration. Earlier this year, Federal Communications Commission Chairman Ajit Pai's outlined his plan to dismantle net neutrality rules, despite polling that shows most Americans support a free and open internet. The FCC has already received a record 5.6 million comments on net neutrality. A fight for the future. A fight for the future. A fight for the future. Action to save net neutrality. Begin with you. Talk about this nationwide action.
So this is a moment for everyone, whether you're an ordinary internet user with a few hundred Instagram fans or a major website with hundreds of thousands of daily visitors. Harness the power of the web. Harness the power of the web. Harness the power of the web to defend this profoundly democratizing technology that's given more of us a voice than ever before. We need to stop companies like Comcast and Verizon from being able to control what we can see and do online, and protect this platform for freedom of expression and social change. And protect this platform for freedom of expression and social change. And protect this platform for freedom of expression and social change.
The network is so vital to economic opportunity and innovation, especially to democracy. This is a tool of unparalleled power that can help us to build democracy. When you look at what has happened to mainstream media, radio, television, and cable, how it has been corporatized and commercialized and consolidated, how much journalism we have lost, you really get down to the essential question: is media providing the news and information that citizens need in order to make intelligent decisions for the future? A lot of evidence that that's really not happening right now. Net neutrality, however, is a free speech issue. At its center is the ability of Americans to go where they want on the internet, to access the content that they want, and to be treated like everybody else is treated. So you don't have Comcast and at&t and Verizon acting as gatekeepers and having the power to slow down sites that they don't like, or to block, or to throttle, or to give fast lanes to a few while the rest of us struggle along on slow lanes. To be a fully participating citizen in 21st century America, you have to have access to high-speed, affordable broadband. And that's what's at issue now.
And protect this platform for freedom of expression and social change.